Marcus Johnson checked his reflection one last time in his car mirror. His navy blue suit fit well, and his tie was straight. He took a deep breath and grabbed his folder of documents from the passenger seat. Today was his court date for a traffic violation he believed was unfair, and he was determined to present his case properly. The county courthouse stood tall and imposing against the morning sky. Marcus climbed the wide stone steps, joining the stream of people entering through the security checkpoint. His stomach tightened as he passed through the metal detector. Growing up, he had heard many stories from his father and uncles about how the justice system treated black men. Just stay calm and speak clearly, his mother had advised on the phone last night. Inside, Marcus followed the signs to courtroom 3. The wooden benches were already half filled with people waiting for their cases to be called. He found a seat near the back and opened his folder, reviewing his evidence one more time. The ticket had been issued when he was driving just 5 miles over the speed limit in a zone where white drivers regularly zoomed past without consequences. He had dashcam footage proving other cars were going much faster. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Catherine Simmons," the bailiff announced. Everyone stood as a middle-aged white woman with steel-gray hair swept into the courtroom. Judge Simmons sat down, adjusted her glasses, and began calling cases. Marcus watched as she handled the people before him. She was quick, efficient, and cold. When a young white woman explained that she couldn't pay her fine because she had lost her job, the judge extended her payment deadline. When an elderly Asian man struggled with English, she grew impatient and rushed him. Marcus noticed a pattern. Judge Simmons seemed to smile at certain defendants and scowl at others. Her tone changed depending on who stood before her. By the time the bailiff called Marcus Johnson, 2 hours had passed, and Marcus had observed enough to feel uneasy. He'd approached the bench confidently, placing his folder on the table. "Good morning, Your Honor," he said clearly. Judge Simmons barely looked up from her papers. "Mr. Johnson, speeding ticket. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor. I have evidence I'd like to present." The judge's eyes finally moved to him, narrowing slightly. "Evidence for a simple speeding ticket. Let's not waste the court's time. With respect, Your Honor, I believe I was unfairly targeted. I have dashcam footage showing." "I don't need to see dashcam footage to know you were speeding, Mr. Johnson," she cut him off. "The officer's word is sufficient." Marcus stood straighter. "Your Honor, the law allows me to present evidence in my defense." Something flickered across Judge Simmons' face, irritation, perhaps, or something deeper. "You people always think you know the law better than those who enforce it." A small murmur passed through the courtroom. Marcus felt eyes on him, but kept his focus on the judge. "Your Honor, I'm simply exercising my rights as a citizen." "Listen, boy," Judge Simmons said, her voice dropping to a dangerous level. "I've been on this bench for 15 years. I know trouble when I see it." The word boy hung in the air like poison. Marcus felt his face grow hot, but he kept his expression neutral. This wasn't just about a traffic ticket anymore. He noticed the court reporter's fingers hesitate over her keyboard, and the bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Little did Judge Simmons know, Marcus had come prepared for more than just a traffic case. The courthouse knew Judge Catherine Simmons long before Marcus Johnson walked through its doors. For 15 years, she had ruled courtroom 3 like her personal kingdom. Her reputation spread through the county like wildfire, strict, unforgiving, and according to whispers in the hallways, deeply biased. Today, Judge Simmons arrived at the courthouse at 7:30 a.m., as she did every morning. She parked her luxury car in her reserved spot and walked briskly through the private entrance. Court employees nodded respectfully as she passed, but few made eye contact. Her dark robe billowed behind her as she moved, creating the impression of a storm cloud approaching. In her chambers, she reviewed the day's docket while sipping black coffee from her Lady Justice mug. Her assistant, Lisa, placed a stack of files on her desk. "Looks like a full morning, Judge Simmons," Lisa said quietly. The judge flipped through the papers, stopping at Marcus Johnson's name. She frowned. "Another speeding ticket dispute. These people need to learn to just pay their fines and move on." Lisa nodded without comment and left the room. Over the years, she had learned when to stay silent around Judge Simmons. When court began at 9:00 a.m., Judge Simmons handled the first few cases efficiently. A young white college student received a reduced fine for his parking violations. An elderly white woman had her case dismissed entirely. The pattern continued until Marcus Johnson stepped forward. The change in the judge's demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. Her back stiffened. Her mouth tightened. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Watching from the gallery was Officer Reynolds, who had written Marcus's ticket. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, recognizing the judge's expression. "Your Honor," Marcus began again, trying to redirect the conversation to his evidence. "I have dashcam footage that shows—" "Mr. Johnson," Judge Simmons interrupted, her voice dripping with condescension. "This court has procedures. You don't get to decide how things work in my courtroom." Marcus stood firm. "I understand, Your Honor. I'm simply trying to present evidence as is my right." Judge Simmons's face flushed slightly. She was not used to being challenged, especially not by defendants like Marcus. She tapped her gavel on the bench, though there was no noise to silence. "Let me tell you something about rights, Mr. Johnson," she said, leaning forward. "Rights come with responsibilities. Responsibility to obey traffic laws, for instance." In the back of the courtroom, a court clerk named Jamal Williams watched with growing concern. He had seen this pattern before with Judge Simmons. As a black man himself, he recognized the coded language and unfair treatment. He caught Marcus's eye briefly and gave an almost imperceptible nod of understanding. Judge Simmons continued, "I see cases like yours every day. Always an excuse, always someone else's fault." "Your Honor," Marcus replied calmly, "I'm not making excuses. I'm presenting facts." The judge's eyes flashed with anger. She wasn't used to people standing their ground before her. Most defendants, especially minorities, would have backed down by now, accepted the fine, and left. But Marcus Johnson wasn't most defendants. Officer Reynolds, who had written the ticket, shifted in his seat again. He remembered stopping Marcus. The man had been polite and cooperative. Watching this unfold made him increasingly uncomfortable, and he considered approaching the bench to clarify the situation, but Judge Simmons's reputation for retribution kept him silent. "Mr. Johnson," Judge Simmons said, her voice now icy, "perhaps where you come from, you can talk back to authorities without consequences. But in my courtroom, there is order and respect." Several spectators exchanged glances. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her keyboard, hesitating to transcribe the judge's increasingly inappropriate comments. Marcus remained composed, even as he recognized the prejudice underlying her words. He had prepared for this possibility, wearing a small recording device clipped to his tie, a completely legal accommodation for his documented hearing impairment. "Your Honor," he said steadily, "I mean no disrespect. I simply wish to present my case fully." The tension in the courtroom was thick enough to cut with a knife as the judge's patience visibly thinned. What happened next would shock everyone present, and change both their lives forever. The atmosphere in courtroom 3 grew heavy as Judge Simmons leaned forward, her knuckles white against the wooden bench. The spectators watched in uncomfortable silence as Marcus Johnson remained standing, his posture straight and dignified despite the judge's growing hostility. "Mr. Johnson," Judge Simmons continued, her voice carrying easily through the silent courtroom, "perhaps you don't understand how things work here. When an officer of the law says you were speeding, you were speeding." Marcus took a deliberate breath before responding. "Your Honor, I understand the officer's statement, but I believe evidence should be considered before judgment is passed. That's how our justice system is designed to work." Several people in the gallery nodded slightly. A young law student taking notes for a class assignment scribbled frantically in her notebook, her eyes wide with disbelief at what was unfolding. Judge Simmons's face darkened. "Don't lecture me about justice, boy. I've forgotten more about the law than you'll ever know." The word "boy" echoed through the courtroom. The court reporter's fingers froze momentarily over her keyboard. The bailiff, a veteran officer named Rodriguez, shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his discomfort evident. "Your Honor," Marcus said evenly, "I'm a 34-year-old business owner with a master's degree. I respectfully ask to be addressed appropriately in this courtroom." A vein pulsed visibly at Judge Simmons's temple. "You people always want special treatment. Address you a certain way, consider your so-called evidence, bend the rules just for you." The racist implications of "you people" hung in the air. A middle-aged white woman in the gallery audibly gasped. The assistant district attorney present for other cases looked down at her shoes, clearly wanting to disappear. I'm only asking for the same treatment as any other citizen, Your Honor, Marcus replied, his voice remarkably calm despite the situation. Judge Simmons shuffled some papers on her bench, not bothering to hide her irritation. Officer Thompson has served this community for 12 years. His word is enough for this court. Maybe in your neighborhood, you don't respect law enforcement, but here we do. Marcus had never mentioned his neighborhood. The implication was clear to everyone present. For the record, Your Honor, Marcus said, I grew up on Maple Street, graduated from Lincoln High School, and now live in Westside Heights. I've never had any issues with law enforcement before this incident. Judge Simmons waved her hand dismissively. I don't need your life story, Mr. Johnson. What I need is for people like you to learn that actions have consequences. In the back of the courtroom, Jamal, the court clerk, was texting the chief court administrator. Emergency in Court 3. Judge S. crossing lines. Racial comments. Need intervention. Officer Reynolds, who had written the ticket, finally stood up. Your Honor, if I may. You may not, Judge Simmons snapped, cutting him off. This matter is decided. She turned back to Marcus. The fine is doubled for wasting the court's time. $400. Pay it within 30 days or face additional penalties. Marcus nodded slowly, gathering his untouched evidence folder. I understand, Your Honor. I doubt that, Judge Simmons muttered, just loud enough for the front of the courtroom to hear. Next case. As Marcus turned to leave, Judge Simmons leaned toward her clerk and whispered something. She didn't realize her microphone was still on, capturing her words clearly. That's how you handle these thugs. They think their fancy suits make them equal. A collective intake of breath swept through the courtroom. Marcus paused mid-step, then continued walking toward the exit, his back straight. The recording device on his tie had captured every word. Court Officer Rodriguez looked physically ill. The assistant district attorney was hastily writing something down. The law student's mouth hung open in shock. As Marcus pushed through the courtroom doors, his face revealed no emotion, but inside, he had already made his decision about what would happen next. Judge Catherine Simmons had just made the biggest mistake of her career, and the clock was now ticking. 7 minutes. That's all it would take to turn the tables completely. Marcus Johnson stepped out of courtroom 3 with his heart pounding in his chest. The corridor outside was cool and quiet compared to the tense atmosphere he had just left. He leaned against the wall for a moment, closing his eyes and taking several deep breaths to calm himself. The judge's words echoed in his mind. Thugs. Boy. You people. Each slur stung like a physical blow. Opening his eyes, Marcus noticed several people from the courtroom had followed him out. A middle-aged white woman in a floral dress approached him hesitantly. I'm so sorry about what happened in there, she said quietly. I've never seen anything like that before. It was wrong. Marcus nodded. Thank you for saying that. I'm a teacher, she continued. If I spoke to any student the way she spoke to you, I'd be fired on the spot. A young law student who had been taking notes joined them. Sir, what she did violates judicial ethics code on multiple levels. That was textbook discrimination. Marcus adjusted his tie, making sure the small recording device was secure. I appreciate your concern, both of you. Inside the courtroom, Judge Simmons had moved on to the next case as if nothing unusual had happened. She called forward an elderly Hispanic man who had a parking violation. Her demeanor instantly shifted to impatience. Mr. Ramirez, I see this is your second appearance for the same issue, she said sharply. English not good enough to understand no parking. The bailiff, Officer Rodriguez, looked toward the doors where Marcus had exited, then back at the judge. Something in him snapped. 15 years of watching similar scenes play out was 15 years too many. He quietly stepped away from his post and slipped out a side door. Meanwhile, Marcus had reached the court administration office on the first floor. The woman at the front desk looked up as he entered. May I help you? She asked. My name is Marcus Johnson. I need to file an immediate complaint about judicial misconduct by Judge Catherine Simmons, he said firmly. Her expression changed, a flash of recognition crossing her face. We've had a few of those, she said cautiously. Let me get you the proper form. I have more than just a complaint, Marcus added, touching his tie. I have recorded evidence of racist remarks made from the bench. The clerk's eyes widened. She picked up her phone and dialed an extension. Mr. Barrett, there's someone here you need to speak with immediately. She covered the mouthpiece and whispered to Marcus, the chief administrator is here today for budget meetings. Good timing. Back in courtroom 3, the atmosphere had grown even more tense. Judge Simmons sensed something had shifted. The usual fearful respect was replaced with silent judgment from the gallery. Even her own clerk avoided eye contact. What's wrong with everyone today? She snapped, glaring around the room. This is a courtroom, not a social gathering. Officer Rodriguez had not returned from his unexplained absence, and a substitute bailiff stood uncomfortably in his place. The assistant district attorney was typing rapidly on her phone, her expression grim. On the first floor, Marcus was now seated in a large office with two men. One was Richard Barrett, the chief court administrator, a tall black man with gray hair and serious eyes. The other was James Wilson, a representative from the State Judicial Conduct Board who happened to be in the building for quarterly reviews. Mr. Johnson, Barrett said gravely, I understand you have evidence of misconduct. Before we proceed, I want you to know we take these matters very seriously. Marcus nodded and reached for his tie. The device is approved for hearing accommodations, he explained, carefully removing the small recorder. Everything is time-stamped and clear. Wilson leaned forward. With your permission, we'd like to hear it now. Marcus placed the device on the desk. Yes, please listen, and there's something else you should know. He paused, looking between the two officials. After what Judge Simmons said to me, I checked the court records. I'm not the first person she's treated this way, but I plan to be the last. Barrett pressed play on the device, and Judge Simmons's voice filled the room, every slur and prejudiced comment perfectly preserved. The breaking point had arrived. Richard Barrett and James Wilson sat in stunned silence as Judge Simmons's voice played through Marcus's recording device. The small speaker captured not only her official court statements, but also the private comments she thought weren't being recorded. Every dismissive tone, every racial slur, every inappropriate comment rang clearly through the office. That's how you handle these thugs. They think their fancy suits make them equal. Wilson's pen froze mid-note. Barrett's face hardened with each word. The recording continued, revealing how Judge Simmons had systematically dismissed Marcus's evidence without consideration, called him boy repeatedly, and made assumptions about his character based solely on his race. When the recording finished, the silence in the room was heavy. Barrett was the first to speak. Mr. Johnson, how did you obtain this recording? We need to be certain it was collected legally. Marcus reached into his folder and pulled out an official document. I have a documented hearing condition that makes it difficult to process verbal information in stressful situations. 6 months ago, I received approval from the state court system to use this recording device as a reasonable accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act. He handed over the paperwork, which clearly showed the authorization stamp from the State Judicial Administrative Office. Wilson examined it carefully. This is completely legitimate, Wilson confirmed. Mr. Johnson had every legal right to record his proceedings for personal reference. The fact that it captured judicial misconduct is, well, fortunate for justice, unfortunate for Judge Simmons. Barrett nodded, his expression grave. In my 30 years working in this courthouse, I've heard rumors about Judge Simmons, but rumors aren't evidence. He gestured to the recording device. This is evidence. Marcus leaned forward. There's more. While waiting for my case to be called, I observed her behavior with other defendants. She was clearly biased, treating white defendants with respect while being harsh and dismissive to people of color. Can others confirm this pattern? Wilson asked. The court clerk, Jamal Williams, has been documenting incidents for months, Marcus replied. He told me so as I was leaving, and Officer Rodriguez, the bailiff, seemed extremely uncomfortable with how she was speaking to me. As if on cue, the office door opened, and Jamal Williams entered with Officer Rodriguez. Both men looked nervous but determined. Sir, Jamal addressed Barrett, I heard you were meeting with Mr. Johnson, Officer Rodriguez, and I would like to add our statements. Barrett gestured for them to sit down. We were just discussing Judge Simmons's conduct. Officer Rodriguez spoke up. I've been the bailiff in her courtroom for 3 years. What happened today wasn't an isolated incident. It's been getting worse, and most people are too intimidated to complain. Jamal nodded in agreement. I've been keeping records. He placed a flash drive on the desk. Dates, times, names of defendants, and notes about differential treatment. I was planning to submit this to the Judicial Conduct Board next month when I had enough evidence. Why wait until now to come forward? Wilson asked. Fear of retaliation, Rodriguez admitted. Judge Simmons has powerful friends in the county, but after today, he shook his head. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Barrett picked up his phone and dialed quickly. Security? This is Chief Administrator Barrett. I need 2 officers at my office immediately for an emergency judicial conduct situation. He hung up and looked at the others. This has gone on long enough. Wilson turned to Marcus. Mr. Johnson, would you be willing to file an official complaint right now, with your recording as evidence? Marcus nodded without hesitation. That's why I'm here. Someone needs to stand up to her. You should know, Barrett warned, this might become very public. Are you prepared for that? Marcus thought about all the people who had suffered under Judge Simmons's prejudice, many without the resources or knowledge to fight back. His single traffic ticket suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the opportunity before him. I'm prepared, he said firmly. Some things are more important than staying comfortable and quiet. 2 security officers knocked on the door. The next few minutes would change everything. The next few minutes unfolded with surprising speed. Richard Barrett, the chief court administrator, briefed the 2 security officers who had arrived at his office. Their expressions shifted from professional neutrality to shock as they listened. Are you sure about this, sir? Asked the older officer, a veteran courthouse security guard named Peterson. We're talking about Judge Simmons. She's been here 15 years. Listen to this, Barrett said, pressing play on Marcus's recording device. As Judge Simmons's voice filled the room again, both officers' faces hardened. When they heard the slurs and racist comments, Officer Peterson shook his head in disgust. That's enough, he said. We've heard enough. James Wilson from the Judicial Conduct Board was already on his phone, speaking rapidly to someone in authority. Yes, sir, we have audio evidence. Multiple witnesses. Clear violations of Judicial Conduct Code sections 2.3, 2.8, and 8.2 at minimum. He listened for a moment. Yes, sir, we're proceeding with emergency removal protocols. Marcus watched this flurry of activity with a mixture of surprise and relief. He had expected to file a complaint that would be processed over weeks or months. He hadn't anticipated such immediate action. Mr. Johnson, Barrett said, turning to him, what happened in that courtroom was not justice. On behalf of this court system, I apologize. Marcus nodded, appreciating the sentiment but more focused on what would happen next. What are the next steps? Wilson put down his phone. The Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court has granted emergency authorization for immediate suspension of Judge Simmons' pending investigation. This is extremely rare, but the evidence is compelling and the violations severe. Barrett turned to the security officers. Peterson, Roberts, go to courtroom 3. Judge Simmons is to be removed from the bench immediately. Be professional but firm. State police have been notified and will arrive shortly to handle potential criminal charges. The officers nodded and left quickly. Barrett turned to Marcus again. Mr. Johnson, would you be willing to wait here? The district attorney's office will want to take your statement. Before Marcus could answer, Jamal, the court clerk, spoke up from where he sat in the corner. She's currently hearing the Rodriguez case. There are about 20 people in the gallery. This is going to be very public. Barrett sighed. Can't be helped. Judicial misconduct of this magnitude requires immediate action. Up in courtroom 3, Judge Simmons was growing increasingly irritated with a young public defender who was trying to explain his client's circumstances. Your Honor, my client was simply... Your client was simply breaking the law, Judge Simmons interrupted. I'm not interested in excuses. The courtroom doors opened, and officers Peterson and Roberts entered. They walked purposefully to the bench, ignoring traditional courtroom protocol. The judge looked up, annoyed at the interruption. What is the meaning of this? She demanded. Officer Peterson spoke clearly, his voice carrying through the silent courtroom. Judge Catherine Simmons, By order of the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court, you are immediately suspended from judicial duties pending investigation into serious misconduct. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Simmons's face flushed deep red. "This is outrageous," she shouted, banging her gavel. "I am presiding over a court in session." "Not anymore, Your Honor," Officer Roberts said firmly. "Please step down from the bench immediately." Judge Simmons looked around wildly, as if seeking allies, but found none. Her own clerk avoided her eyes. The bailiff stood impassively. Even the assistant district attorney was gathering her papers, clearly unwilling to intervene. "This is about the Johnson man, isn't it?" the judge said, her voice rising. "You're taking his word over mine? Do you know who I am? Who my husband is?" Officer Peterson stepped closer. "Judge Simmons, please don't make this more difficult. We have clear evidence of judicial misconduct, including racially discriminatory behavior from the bench." The judge's face drained of color as she realized what had happened. "He recorded me? That's illegal." "No, ma'am," Roberts replied. He had authorized accommodations for a hearing condition. Everything was legal and is now evidence. 7 minutes. That's all it had taken from the moment Marcus left the courtroom to the moment justice arrived for Judge Catherine Simmons. And this was only the beginning. The spectators in courtroom 3 sat in stunned silence as Judge Catherine Simmons was escorted from her bench. Her face had transformed from outrage to shock, then to fear as she realized the seriousness of the situation. The black robe that had been her armor of authority for 15 years now seemed to hang heavy on her shoulders. "This is a mistake," she insisted as Officer Peterson firmly guided her toward the side door. "You can't do this to me. My husband plays golf with the governor." Her protests echoed in the suddenly quiet courtroom. The defendants waiting for their cases sat frozen, unsure if they should leave or stay. The young law student who had witnessed Marcus's treatment frantically took notes, understanding she was watching a historic moment unfold. As Judge Simmons disappeared through the door, 2 state police officers appeared at the main entrance. They spoke briefly with Officer Roberts before following the path that Peterson and the judge had taken. The whispers in the courtroom grew louder. Did they just arrest the judge? What happened? It's about that black man she was horrible to earlier. The assistant district attorney stood and addressed the room. "Court is suspended for the day. All cases will be rescheduled. Please check with court administration for your new dates." Meanwhile, in a small conference room off the main corridor, Judge Simmons sat rigidly in a chair, her hands clenched together on the table. Across from her, a state police detective explained the situation. "Judge Catherine Simmons, you are being placed under arrest for violations of civil rights statutes, abuse of judicial authority, and creating a hostile environment in a government facility." "This is ridiculous," she hissed. "One angry defendant makes a complaint and you're arresting me? Do you know how many criminals come through my courtroom making excuses?" The detective's face remained impassive. "Judge Simmons, we have clear audio evidence of your conduct. Multiple witnesses have come forward, including court employees who have documented a pattern of similar behavior." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the judge's face. "What employees? Who's been spying on me?" "That's not important right now," the detective replied. "What's important is that you understand your rights." He began reading her Miranda rights, the irony of the situation lost on no one in the room. Down in Barrett's office, Marcus was giving his statement to a representative from the district attorney's office. His voice was calm and measured as he recounted not only his experience but also what he had observed of other defendants' treatments. "It wasn't just what she said to me," Marcus explained. "It was how she changed her entire demeanor depending on who stood before her. White defendants received patience, understanding, even leniency. But the moment a person of color stepped up, her tone changed, her assumptions changed, her rulings became harsher." The DA's representative nodded, typing rapidly. "Your recording is extremely compelling evidence, Mr. Johnson. In my 15 years with the prosecutor's office, I've never seen such a clear-cut case of judicial misconduct." Outside the courthouse, news vans were already arriving. A court employee had tipped off the local media about a judge being removed from the bench, and the story was spreading like wildfire. Social media was buzzing with partial accounts from people who had been in the courtroom. By early afternoon, Marcus stepped outside to find reporters waiting. Camera lights flashed as he emerged from the building with Barrett and Wilson flanking him protectively. "Mr. Johnson, can you tell us what happened in there? Did Judge Simmons really use racial slurs in court? Are you pressing charges?" Barrett stepped forward. "The court will issue an official statement later today. For now, we can confirm that Judge Catherine Simmons has been suspended pending a full investigation into serious allegations of misconduct." Marcus stayed silent, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. As they moved toward the parking lot, his phone buzzed with messages from friends and family who had already seen his name in breaking news alerts. One message from his mother simply read, "You stood up when it mattered. So proud of you." Judge Simmons was led out through a back entrance, away from the cameras, her hands cuffed in front of her. The expression on her face was one of disbelief, as if she still couldn't comprehend how her world had collapsed so completely in just 7 short minutes. 6 months passed since the day Judge Catherine Simmons was escorted from her courtroom. The autumn leaves had fallen, winter had come and gone, and now spring brought new beginnings to the county courthouse. Marcus Johnson stood at the podium in the main hall, addressing a crowd of reporters, community leaders, and ordinary citizens who had gathered for this important moment. "Today isn't about one judge or one incident," Marcus said, his calm voice carrying through the hall. "It's about making sure our justice system truly delivers justice for everyone, regardless of their skin color." Behind him sat members of the state legislature, court administrators, and several people who had previously been unfairly treated in Judge Simmons's courtroom. Their stories had emerged in the weeks following the judge's removal, creating a flood of similar accounts spanning her 15-year career. The investigation had revealed disturbing patterns in Judge Simmons's rulings. Black defendants received sentences averaging 40% longer than white defendants for identical offenses. Latino defendants were denied bail at 3 times the rate of white defendants with similar records. The evidence was overwhelming and damning. "When I walked into that courtroom 6 months ago," Marcus continued, "I never imagined it would lead to today. I was just one person trying to stand up against unfairness. But that's how change begins, with one person refusing to accept injustice." In the months following Judge Simmons's arrest, Marcus had become an unexpected spokesperson for judicial reform. His calm demeanor, clear speaking style, and first-hand experience made him the perfect advocate. He had testified before the State Judicial Ethics Committee, met with legislators, and shared his story with community groups across the state. Today, Governor Williams will sign the Judicial Fairness and Accountability Act, Marcus announced. This new law requires anti-bias training for all judges, creates an independent review board to examine patterns in judicial decisions, and makes it easier for people to report misconduct without fear of retaliation. The crowd applauded as the governor approached the podium. She shook Marcus's hand before addressing the audience. "What happened in courtroom 3 last fall was a failure of our system," Governor Williams said. "But because one brave citizen spoke up, and because he had the foresight to document what happened, we were able to uncover a pattern of injustice that had gone unchecked for too long." As for Judge Simmons, her fall had been swift and complete. After her arrest, more evidence emerged, including emails and text messages revealing her prejudiced views. She had ultimately pleaded guilty to civil rights violations and abuse of judicial authority in exchange for a reduced sentence of 2 years under house arrest, permanent disbarment, and forfeiture of her judicial pension. The young law student who had witnessed Marcus's treatment that day now worked as an intern for the new Judicial Review Board. Officer Rodriguez had been promoted to head of courthouse security, with a mandate to ensure fair treatment for all visitors. Jamal Williams, the court clerk who had documented the judge's behavior for months, was now training court employees across the state on recognizing and reporting judicial misconduct. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed, an elderly black man approached Marcus near the courthouse steps. "My grandson got 3 years from Judge Simmons for a minor drug offense," the man said quietly. "White kid next on the docket got probation for the same thing. They're reviewing his case now because of you." Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of the man's words. It shouldn't have taken so long for someone to stop her. But someone did, the old man replied, his eyes shining with emotion. "You did." As Marcus walked down the courthouse steps, he reflected on how one moment of standing firm against injustice had created ripples that continued to spread. The traffic ticket that had brought him to court that day had long since been dismissed, but its impact would be felt for generations to come. The new judge who had replaced Simmons in courtroom 3 had a sign prominently displayed behind her bench. It read simply, "Equal justice under law." For the first time in 15 years, those words were finally true.